When you've been through a divorce, you learn to listen differently. You don't just hear words, you listen for intent, for tone, for the little glimpses of who a person really is when they stop pretending. So when my girlfriend Tessa said, "Your kids from your first marriage aren't my problem," it wasn't during a fight, it was during dinner, calm, casual, over a glass of wine, and the faint sound of jazz in the background. We'd been talking about finances. Specifically, the college fund I'd been building for my 2 kids. Ethan and Lily, they were teenagers now, both bright, curious, and full of dreams that I'd promised myself I'd help make real. Tessa had asked why I didn't just use that money to upgrade our lives. Her tone was light. But the question wasn't. I mean, she said, swirling her wine, "They're almost grown. Shouldn't they be figuring things out on their own?" I set my fork down slowly. "They're my kids. It's my job to make sure they have a future." She shrugged. "Yeah, but they're not my responsibility. I didn't sign up to fund someone else's kids." I remember staring at her for a moment, really staring. The woman I'd thought might be my next chapter had just shown me the first paragraph of her true self. It wasn't pretty. I smiled instead of arguing. "You're absolutely right," I said quietly. She smiled back, thinking she'd won. That night, after she went to bed, I sat in my office, pulled up my accounts, and stared at my life insurance policy. I'd added her as a secondary beneficiary months ago, a symbolic gesture. I'd told myself to show I was serious about building a life together. But that night, something shifted. I removed her name. Every single tie she had to my finances, my future, my kids gone. I listed Ethan and Lily as the only beneficiaries. My children would always come first. Always. The next morning, Tessa kissed me goodbye like nothing had happened. She had no idea she'd just been erased from the future she thought she was securing. And in that quiet satisfaction, I realized something powerful. Sometimes you don't need to fight to win. You just need to stop giving people access to what they don't value. I didn't bring it up again. I didn't argue, guilt trip, or justify. I just observed. And over the next few weeks, she gave me even more reasons to know I'd done the right thing. From little digs about your ex's kids to comments like, "You'd be so much freer without that baggage." The mask kept slipping, and all I did was take notes. Because when someone tells you exactly what kind of person they are, believe them. It was when she finally asked, "Where do you see us in the future?" That's when everything came full circle. A few weeks passed, and I played along like nothing had changed. Tessa was cheerful, affectionate even, and had no idea the clock was ticking on the fantasy she'd built around us. She loved to talk about our future, the house she wanted, the vacations we'd take, the ring she hinted at every other weekend. But the word hour had started to sound different to me. To her, it meant mine. One night we were out with friends at a rooftop bar. Tessa leaned in, laughing, telling them how I spoiled her. "He's just too nice," she said, squeezing my arm. Honestly, I hit the jackpot. Everyone laughed, and I smiled, playing my role. But inside, I felt that dull ache that comes when you realize someone loves what you do for them, not who you are to them. After dinner, as we were driving home, she asked, "So, about that house we looked at, did you talk to your financial advisor yet?" I kept my tone calm. "Yeah, we talked. And I made a few changes," I said simply. She glanced at me. "Changes like what?" I smiled faintly, making sure my kids are protected. You were right, they should be my priority. Her lips parted slightly, but she didn't say anything. Instead, she laughed it off, though. I saw the flicker of discomfort behind her eyes. "Well, as long as it doesn't mean cutting me out," she joked, forcing a smile. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Later that week, she started noticing small differences. I'd stopped using the joint card we'd shared for groceries. I no longer discussed my accounts with her. I even changed a few passwords. Not because I thought she'd steal, but because trust wasn't something she deserved access to anymore. One night, she came into my office, crossing her arms. "You've been distant lately," she said. "What's going on?" "Just focusing on work," I said. "Are you sure it's not something else?" I looked up at her. "I'm just trying to make sure my priorities are in order." She frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means," I said slowly, "I'm done giving people access to parts of my life they don't respect." She stared at me like she was trying to figure out if it was an insult or a warning. Maybe it was both. The next morning, I caught her scrolling through my laptop when she thought I was in the shower. She froze when I stepped into the doorway. "Looking for something?" I asked. She stammered. I was just checking the flight details for our trip. Right? I said flatly, walking past her. That night I slept like a man who already knew how this story would end. And soon enough, she'd write the final chapter herself without realizing I'd already closed the book. The next few days felt strangely peaceful, quiet, almost weightless. I had stopped over-explaining myself, stopped trying to fix the little fractures that she didn't even acknowledge. Tessa, on the other hand, could sense something shifting. She started asking more questions. You're not as affectionate lately. Is everything okay? I'd shrug, kiss her on the forehead and say, everything's fine. But she knew it wasn't. The funny thing about selfish people is that they can always feel when their control is slipping. By that weekend, she was in full performance mode, cooking dinner, suggesting weekend getaways, even mentioning the idea of meeting my kids more often. That last part nearly made me laugh. A few weeks ago, they were not her problem. Now she wanted to be stepmom material. I played along, not maliciously, just silently, because when you stop feeding someone's ego, they start starving for attention. Then, one evening, while I was out on a work call, she went snooping again. Only this time, she got what she was looking for, the truth. I came home to find her sitting on the couch, holding her phone. My laptop was open on the coffee table. She'd found the insurance policy. Why am I not listed anymore? She demanded, voice trembling with anger. I hung up my call, set the phone down, and said evenly, because I changed it. To what? To your kids? Are you serious? I met her glare with calm eyes. I'm very serious. You said they weren't your problem? I just made sure you weren't theirs either. Her jaw dropped. That's not fair. I didn't mean it like that. I tilted my head. You meant it exactly like that. You just didn't expect me to agree with you. She was furious, pacing, cursing under her breath, calling me dramatic. Then she switched tactics. You're overreacting. It was just a comment. You know I care about them. About you. But the problem with fake affection is that once you see through it, you can't unsee it. I wasn't angry. I was done. I'm not punishing you, I said quietly. I'm protecting what matters. You just didn't make the list. She froze, like she didn't know whether to scream or cry. So what now? She asked softly. I smiled faintly. Now, nothing. You keep living your life. I'll live mine. The silence between us was deafening. For the first time, she looked uncertain, stripped of the upper hand she'd always assumed she had. When she finally went to bed that night, I stayed in the living room, watching the clock tick. Ow. I wasn't replaying her words or second-guessing my choices. I was just free. And freedom, I realized, doesn't always come with fireworks. Sometimes it just looks like peace, the kind that comes after a long overdue ending. The next morning, Tessa was quiet. Not the pouty kind of quiet, the calculating kind. The one where she was already trying to figure out how to spin the situation in her favor. She made breakfast, set the table, and pretended nothing had happened the night before. When I walked in, she smiled like everything was perfectly fine. I made your favorite omelet with spinach and cheese, she said. I nodded, poured myself a cup of coffee, and sat down without saying a word. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable for me anymore. It was hers to deal with. So, she said after a few minutes, I was thinking maybe we could take a weekend trip, just us, reconnect. Reconnecting would mean there's still something to connect, I replied simply. Her fork froze midair. What's that supposed to mean? It means I'm done pretending, I said, setting my coffee down. You showed me who you are, Tessa. I believe you. And now I'm acting accordingly. Her face turned pale. You're really throwing everything away over one comment? I laughed quietly. One comment? You've been making comments like that for months. You just never thought they mattered because I didn't push back. She looked like she was trying to gather her defenses but didn't know where to start. You're being cold, she muttered. I'm being clear, I corrected. There's a difference. After that, she didn't say much. She left the table, slammed a few drawers upstairs, and locked herself in the bedroom for most of the day. When she finally emerged, she had a new strategy. Tears. She sat next to me on the couch, eyes red. I messed up, okay? I didn't mean to sound selfish. Just, I've never been with someone who actually takes care of things like you do. I panicked. It might have worked a few months ago. But at that moment, all I could think was how many times I'd justified someone else's lack of empathy. I appreciate the apology, I said. But this isn't about panic. It's about values. Her lip trembled. So what? That's it. You're just done. I nodded. I was done the night you made it clear where my kids stood with you. Everything since then has just been confirmation. She wiped her eyes, looking more angry than heartbroken now. You'll regret this, she said bitterly. You're going to realize I was the best thing that ever happened to you. I smiled faintly. If the best thing that ever happened to me was someone who saw my kids as an inconvenience, then I'd rather live without the best. She didn't respond. She just grabbed her purse, muttered something under her breath, and left. And as the door shut behind her, I took a deep breath, the kind that felt like air after drowning. It wasn't relief. It was something deeper. It was the sound of peace finally moving back in. The next few days were eerily quiet. No texts, no calls, no dramatic apologies, just silence. I have expected Tessa to show up at my door, but she didn't. Not yet. It was strange. My house felt bigger without her, but in the best possible way. I started noticing the small things I'd stopped enjoying while she was around. The smell of coffee in the morning. It's the peace of reading a book without someone sighing for attention. Even the soft hum of my own thoughts. For the first time in months, I wasn't walking on eggshells. I spent that weekend with my kids. We grilled in the backyard, watched movies, and laughed real, effortless laughter that didn't come with hidden tension or judgment. Ethan, my son, looked at me and said, "Dad, you seem lighter?" I smiled. "I think I am, buddy." He didn't press. Kids are smart like that. They see things we pretend to hide. On Sunday evening, though, the peace cracked. Tessa called. At first I ignored it. Then came the text. "We need to talk." I debated responding, but curiosity or closure won. I agreed to meet her at a cafe downtown the next day. When I arrived, she was already there, hair perfectly done, wearing the same confidence she used to weaponize. But this time, it looked brittle. She started before I could sit. I've been thinking a lot, and I realized how harsh I sounded that night. I didn't mean to disrespect your kids or you. I was just scared about the future, about depending on someone again. I leaned back, scared or selfish. Her lips tightened. "Can't it be both?" "Could be," I said. "But selfish people don't usually admit they're selfish until they lose something." She flinched, then leaned forward. "I just don't want to lose you, okay? We can fix this. We can start over." I looked at her for a long moment. She really believed this was salvageable, that words could unburn bridges. "Tessa," I said softly, "starting over only works when both people were honest the first time." She frowned. "So you're really not forgiving me?" "I already did," I said. "Forgiving you doesn't mean letting you back in. It just means I've stopped carrying the anger." Her expression hardened. "Wow, you think you're so noble." "Not noble," I said calmly. "Just done repeating lessons I've already learned." She crossed her arms, defensive again. "You'll regret this. You think women like me are easy to find?" I smiled faintly. "Yeah, I don't want women like you. I want peace. And peace is a lot rarer than charm." For the first time, she didn't have a comeback. She just stared, angry, proud, and maybe a little heartbroken before walking out. I watched her go without a word. Because when someone shows you what love isn't, you stop chasing what it was never meant to be. After that meeting, everything felt finished. Not in the bitter, angry way breakups usually end, but in the quiet way storms pass, leaving behind air that feels fresher than before. I went home and poured myself a glass of whiskey. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to justify my choices to anyone. I had protected my kids, my peace, and my future, all in one decision. A week later, an envelope showed up in the mail. It was from the insurance company, confirming the changes to my policy. I smiled when I saw the line that read, "Beneficiaries, Ethan and Lily Thompson." That single sentence meant more than any apology Tessa could have given. Later that evening, I sat with my kids at dinner. Lily, my daughter, was going on about her art club, and Ethan was arguing about college choices. Normal stuff. The kind of chaos that felt like home. When they asked about Tessa, I didn't say much. Just, she and I wanted different things, and that was enough. I didn't add anything else. There was nothing to argue about. She didn't reply after that. Maybe she realized what I had the moment she said those words, that love isn't about convenience or ego. It's about responsibility, and mine was always to my kids. Funny thing is, the peace that followed was addictive. I started running again, joined a small community group that helped mentor teenagers who didn't have strong father figures. For once, my time went somewhere meaningful. One evening, after a long jog, I passed by the restaurant where Tessa and I had our first date. Through the window, I saw her sitting there, alone, staring at her phone. For a split second, our eyes met. She froze, almost like she wanted to wave, but didn't. I gave her a small nod and kept walking. No hate, no nostalgia, just closure. Sometimes life doesn't need revenge or dramatic endings. Sometimes peace is the ending. That night, I sat on my porch, watching the sky fade into orange and purple. Lily brought me her sketchbook, showing me a drawing of our family. Me, her, Ethan, and even our old dog, Duke. "Do you like it?" she asked. I smiled. "I love it." "You even got my smile right," she grinned. "You been smiling more lately?" I looked at her and said quietly, "Yeah, I finally remembered what it feels like to be free for the right reasons. Because in the end, losing someone who never valued your family isn't a loss. It's just life making space for something better. And for me, that something better was finally being the man my kids already thought I was." If you've made it this far, go ahead and hit the like button, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments.